In the north, where ancient traditions collide with the hunger for power, a wedding was supposed to seal alliances and silence enemies. But in the heart of someone, murder was being planned. Welcome to Tales by View, where stories burn into unforgettable scents. Please hit that subscribe button to help us grow, and tell us in the comments which country you're watching from. We love seeing where our stories travel. The wedding drums began at sunset, low and deep, the kind of sound that carried for miles across Kano's ancient walls, through mango groves and marble courtyards, until even the hawkers on the roadside paused to listen. By the time the sky bruised into indigo, the palace grounds blazed with light strung like constellations, and the entire city seemed to hum beneath their glow. Everyone who mattered had come. Ministers in crisp agbatas, foreign investors in sleek tuxedos, first ladies glittering in lace as soft as whispers. The air held the sense of burning incense, roses imported from Lebanon, and the metallic tang of coming rain. Cameramen jostled for space while influencers rehearsed captions they hoped would go viral by morning. But at the center of this galaxy of wealth and power sat Amina Jamil, heiress to the Jamil fortune, her beauty so precise it looked almost engineered. Tonight, she wore a gown the color of moonlight spilling through gold, hand-sewn by a Parisian designer, long sleeves heavy with crystal beading, a veil that draped like smoke down her back. Henna curled up her arms in patterns older than memory, every curve catching the light of the chandeliers above. Beside her stood Chief Ibrahim Jadado, her groom, tall even with age, bowing his shoulders slightly, his beard streaked with dignified silver. At 58 he was still broad, still imposing, his babinriga white enough to blind under the camera flashes, gold embroidery crawling along its edges. To the world he was power incarnate, oil baron, political godfather, rumored to have a hand in every major deal north of the Niger. To Amina, he was something else entirely. She kept her face serene, the way she had been taught since childhood. A Jamil daughter never frowned where cameras could find her. But under the glitter and music, a thought pulsed steady and cold. By the time this marriage saw its first week, Ibrahim Jadado would be dead. And Amina would be the one to kill him. The ceremonies spun around her in a whirl of color and sound, elders chanting blessings in Hausa and Arabic, dancers stomping to the drummer's rhythms, the muezzin's call weaving through from a distant mosque. Tradition unfolded like a long, embroidered carpet, gifts carried in on silver trays, prayers rising like smoke to the night sky, cola nuts broken between palms darkened by decades of desert sun. The betrothal had been announced 6 months earlier in Abuja, inside a marble hall where politicians and imams gathered under chandeliers shaped like stars. It was not just wedding, it was a merger of dynasties, the Jamils and the Jadados, 2 names older than independence, 2 fortunes stretching across oil rigs, banks, shipping lines, and real estate empires from Lagos to Dubai. Contracts had been signed, cows slaughtered, champagne popped in hotels whose owners owed both families favors. Breaking it would have been unthinkable. The North loved its traditions, especially the ancient ones. Among the old House of Fulani families, betrothal was not just promise but prophecy. Families swore oaths before ancestors and Allah both. A broken vow could stain a lineage for generations. But Amina Jamil had plans older men in white babinrigas couldn't begin to imagine. From the crowd's edge, someone watched her. Adrian Haruna leaned against a marble pillar, his suit midnight black, tie loosened like he couldn't breathe in all this gold-drenched air. He had flown in from California 2 weeks ago, his face still fresh on the cover of Forbes Africa, the billionaire who coded his way to the top. And yet here he was, silent among governors and generals, watching the girl he had grown up with prepare to marry a man twice her age. The music swelled, the ululations of women slicing through the night like silver. Amina stood when they told her to, knelt when required, lifted the Quran when the Imam signaled. Cameras flashed so bright it felt like standing in a lightning storm. At her side, Ibrahim Jadado's hand hovered near her back, never quite touching but always there, as though he already owned the space around her. His smile stayed fixed, perfect for the newspapers tomorrow. Amina stayed fixed too. Only Adrian saw the flicker behind it, the small betrayals in her eyes when no one else was looking. The wedding banquet unfolded like a scene painted in gold. Under the canopies strung with fairy lights, waiters in white gloves carried silver trays stacked with lamb marinated in saffron, bowls of jollof that steamed beneath polished lids, pyramids of sugared fruits glistening like jewels. The music rolled across the palace grounds in waves, talking drums answering the sharp cry of kakaki trumpets, house of praise singers weaving Amina and Ibrahim's names into ancient verses. The guests shimmered too, senators with bellies straining against their babanrigas, ministers' wives wrapped in lace as bright as flames, businessmen leaning close to swap rumors in voices greased with whiskey and ambition. Every laugh sounded slightly too loud, like people wanted to be heard by the right ears. Every smile glittered like the diamonds on wrists and ears and necklines. And always, the cameras. Flashing. Recording. Spinning the night into headlines before the last course even touched the tables. A wedding for the ages. The union that will change the North forever. Billionaire princess marries kingmaker in historic ceremony. But the cameras didn't catch the way Amina's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her champagne glass. Or how her eyes kept drifting toward the dark edge of the gardens, where Adrian Haruna stood half-hidden by the shadows of a jacaranda tree. Adrian hadn't moved much since the ceremonies began. He stood with that same quiet defiance he had carried since boyhood, like the whole world could roar around him and he would still be a storm unto himself. He hadn't approached her yet. Maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he understood that tonight, under these lights, under this weight of history and money and tradition, there were things bigger than them both. But she felt his eyes. And behind them, the questions neither of them had spoken since he returned from California. The air thickened with perfume and power as the night crawled toward midnight. Ibrahim Jadado laughed at something a governor said, slapped the man on the back, ordered more wine for the table. He looked like a man in full command of his world, the center of gravity for every politician and tycoon within 50 miles. But power had a smell, Amina thought. It was in the way people leaned toward him, in the way waiters hurried to refill his glass before he even looked up, in the way conversations tilted when he entered a room. It was also in the way no one, not even family, told him no. The first time she had met him properly, 6 months ago in Abuja, he hadn't asked what she wanted. Not about the marriage. Not about her studies in London, her plans to open a fashion house in Lagos, her life at all. He had only smiled that slow, polished smile and told her father, Alhaji Muhammad Jamil, that he would take good care of her. Like she was property. Like she was another oil well to be acquired. That night in Abuja, after the contracts were signed, Amina had sat in her hotel suite and stared at the city lights for a long time. She had heard the way the elders spoke about the betrothal, how it would unite fortunes, strengthen political alliances, please the ancestors. But no one had asked her what she wanted. And now her father was gone, buried only 2 months after signing the marriage contracts, a heart attack, they said, though whispers followed his death like shadows. Whispers Amina hadn't been able to ignore. Ibrahim poured himself another glass of wine. Amina watched the red swirl into crystal, caught the glint of the gold ring on his finger. His third wife before her had died mysteriously 5 years ago, another thing people didn't talk about too loudly. A widow at 28 they had called her. And now Amina Jamil at 24, stepping into the same house. The music rose again, the drums shaking the floor, dancers spinning until their skirts blurred. Ibrahim pushed back his chair, came to stand beside her, a public gesture for the cameras. He took her hand, raised it slightly, like a man showing off his prize. The crowd cheered. Amina smiled. But behind the veil, her mind was already moving, cold and precise. Because she knew what the rest of them didn't. This wedding was not the beginning of her story. It was the beginning of his end. The banquet wound down slowly, like a fire losing its last flames. Guests began drifting toward the gates in glittering clusters, chattering about the size of the bride price, the governor's drunken toast, the drone that almost crashed into the minister's wife's galley. The music softened into low talking drums as the air cooled. Staff cleared away silver trays and empty bottles. Somewhere behind the tents, a singer crooned an old Hausa love song that made the older women sigh into their shawls. Amina sat perfectly still, every inch the obedient bride as the elders gave their final prayers. but her eyes kept darting toward the gardens. Adrian Haruna had moved closer. He stood just beyond the last ring of lantern light now, half in shadow, his white kaftan stirring faintly in the night breeze. He was watching her in that unreadable way he had, steady, searching, like a man measuring the distance between them. When Ibrahim finally turned to greet a visiting emir, Amina rose from the table, murmured something about fresh air, and slipped toward the garden. She didn't look back. The jacaranda tree cast long, broken shadows across the grass. She stopped beneath its branches, heart hammering louder than the music behind her. Adrian stepped forward slowly, as though he had been waiting for this exact moment all night. "You married him," he said softly. It wasn't really a question. Amina's veil shifted in the wind. "You came back too late." Adrian studied her face for a long time. His eyes caught the faint glow of the lanterns, sharp and clear like a hawk's. "They say he killed his last wife," he murmured. Amina's mouth tilted in the ghost of a smile. "They say many things." He hesitated. "And you still married him?" She met his gaze fully now, the gold on her wrists catching the faint light. "Maybe I have my reasons." Something unreadable crossed Adrian's face, something like anger but softer around the edges. He stepped closer. "Amina, tell me this isn't about revenge." She didn't answer. The drums carried on behind them, the voices rising with laughter and music, the whole wedding oblivious to the sharp little storm building beneath the jacaranda tree. "Finally," she said quietly, "Ibrahim thinks he's untouchable." Her voice barely stirred the air. "But every king falls, Adrian. Some sooner than others." Adrian stared at her for a long time, then stepped back as the sound of approaching footsteps broke the spell. Ibrahim emerged from the shadows, irritation flashing across his face before he smoothed it into his public smile. "So this is where my wife ran off to," he said lightly, though his hand gripped her arm just a little too firmly. Amina turned with perfect calm. "I needed some air." Ibrahim's eyes flicked briefly to Adrian. "Old friend, isn't it?" Adrian nodded once. His jaw was tight. "We grew up together." Ibrahim's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "Good. Then you'll understand when I say my wife has had a long day. She needs rest." It wasn't a request. Adrian's gaze lingered on Amina for half a heartbeat longer, then he turned and melted back into the shadows. Ibrahim led Amina toward the waiting car, his hand heavy on hers. "Tomorrow we leave for Abuja," he said. "The honeymoon can wait. There are meetings I need you to attend with me." Amina looked out the window as the car pulled away from the palace. The night air smelled of dust and flowers. Her veil fluttered faintly in the wind. And as the city lights blurred past, she thought again of his third wife. The widow at 28. She wondered if anyone had told Ibrahim that sometimes the bride wasn't the sacrifice. Sometimes she was the executioner. The flight to Abuja left Kano before dawn, the private jet slicing through a sky still heavy with stars. Amina sat by the window, her face pale in the cabin light, the world beneath them disappearing into clouds. Ibrahim spent most of the flight on the phone. He spoke in the language of power, oil contracts, campaign funding, rumors about a minister under investigation. The words rolled off his tongue like silk, but Amina heard the steel beneath them. This was a man who never asked for anything twice. A man who saw loyalty as a currency and people as pieces on his board. When the jet landed, the capital greeted them with the heavy heat of early morning. Black SUVs waited on the tarmac. Sirens cleared the highway before their convoy even reached the city center. Ibrahim's mansion stood on a hill above Maitama, its white walls gleaming in the sun. The gates opened like the mouth of some giant beast. Inside, the air smelled of jasmine and polished marble. Servants bowed as Amina passed. The house was a cathedral of wealth. Italian furniture, chandeliers dripping crystal, rugs thick enough to swallow footsteps. On one wall hung a portrait of Ibrahim in traditional regalia, a smile playing on his lips like he was in on a secret the world would never learn. That first afternoon, Amina unpacked in silence while Ibrahim's security men patrolled the grounds. He disappeared into his study with 2 politicians and a banker, the door locking behind them. She stood by the window, watching the fountain in the courtyard toss silver water into the air. Adrian had been right. People whispered about Ibrahim's third wife. About the sudden illness, the quick burial, the will signed just 2 weeks before her death. But no one ever spoke too loudly. That was the thing about men like Ibrahim Jadado. Their power lived in the spaces between words. That evening, as the sun dropped behind the hills, Ibrahim finally emerged from his study. He poured himself whiskey, handed her a glass of white wine. "To the future," he said, smiling. Amina raised her glass. Their eyes met over the rim. He didn't notice how cold her smile had become. Over the next week, Abuja swallowed them whole. Gala dinners in hotels dripping with chandeliers. Closed-door meetings with governors and CEOs. Photo shoots for magazines eager to show the world the power couple. Everywhere they went, Amina played the part. The elegant young bride, silent when the men talked politics, graceful when the cameras flashed. But at night, when the house went quiet, she thought about his third wife again. And about her father. 2 months dead, buried before she even flew back from London. A father who had trusted Ibrahim enough to sign the marriage contracts, and died before he could watch his daughter walk down the aisle. Sometimes, in the quiet hours, she wondered if her father's death and the marriage weren't accidents at all. It was at a charity gala on their 5th night in Abuja that Adrian appeared again. He was standing near the bar, wearing a dark suit that made him look older, harder. When their eyes met across the room, something in her chest tightened. He didn't approach at first. He just watched her as she moved through the crowd on Ibrahim's arm, smiling for politicians, laughing softly at their jokes. Finally, as she stepped onto the terrace for air, he followed. "You look like you can't breathe," he said quietly. She glanced around to make sure no one was close enough to hear. "Maybe I can't." He studied her face, the diamonds glittering against her neck. "He keeps you busy." "He keeps me caged," she murmured. Adrian's eyes darkened. "Then leave." Amina turned to face the city lights. "It's not that simple." He waited, saying nothing. Finally she said, "Do you know what people call him behind closed doors? The kingmaker. Because presidents, governors, senators, none of them rise without his blessing. He owns them. And he thinks he owns me." Adrian's voice was low. "So you'll kill him?" She didn't answer. But she didn't deny it either. The first crack in Ibrahim's armor came 2 nights later. A business partner arrived at the mansion, furious about a deal gone wrong in Port Harcourt. Their arguments spilled into the hallway, shouts, accusations, a threat about money laundering that made even the security guards glance nervously at each other. From the staircase, Amina watched Ibrahim slam his glass down hard enough to shatter it. For the first time, she saw something raw flicker across his face. Just for a second. Then it was gone, smoothed over by the usual arrogance. But Amina had seen it. And she knew then that kings bled like everyone else. That night, she called Adrian. When he answered, she said only one thing. "Do you still have friends in the police?" There was a long pause on the line. Then, "What do you need, Amina?" Her voice was steady. "Someone who can make a death look natural." The rain came down hard over Abuja the next evening, sheets of water slanting across the mansion's wide glass windows. Ibrahim paced his study, phone pressed to his ear, voice sharp as broken glass. Something about a missing shipment, a senator threatening to go public. Amina watched from the hallway, unseen, as he slammed the phone down and reached for his whiskey. He was unraveling. Not much. Not enough for the world to notice. But she saw it, the twitch in his jaw, the way his hand trembled slightly before he steadied it. Even kings had cracks in their crowns. Later, in the quiet of her suite, Amina opened her laptop and typed in a name Adrian had given her. Inspector Salisu Dunladi. A policeman with debts. A policeman who drank too much. A policeman who, according to Adrian, had helped cover up things for men like Ibrahim before. But this time, she needed him to do the opposite. When she met Salisu 2 nights later in a dim cafe on the outskirts of the city, he smelled of cheap cigarettes and rain-soaked leather. "You want him dead," Salisu said after Adrian made the introductions. Amina didn't flinch. "I want it to look like he died in his sleep. Heart failure." Something unremarkable. Salisu studied her with small, sharp eyes. People like Ibrahim don't die unremarkably. Too many enemies. Too many vultures waiting for the body to hit the ground. Then make it look like the vultures had nothing to do with it, Amina said evenly. The policeman leaned back, his chair creaking. It will cost. Money wasn't the problem. The problem was timing. Ibrahim had a trip planned to London in 3 weeks. Meetings with investors, a conference where he would speak about sustainable energy in West Africa. 3 weeks. Amina didn't want to wait that long. Back at the mansion, the tension between husband and wife sharpened like a knife against stone. Ibrahim grew more controlling as the days passed. He didn't like the way she slipped out to visit friends, without telling him who. He didn't like the way Adrian kept appearing at events, always lingering just far enough to stay respectable. One night, after a dinner with a former military ruler, Ibrahim cornered her in the hall. "I don't want to see you talking to Haruna again," he said, voice low but hard. Amina met his gaze without blinking. "He's an old friend." "Old friends bring trouble," Ibrahim said. "And I have enough of that already." He gripped her arm. Not hard enough to bruise, but hard enough. Amina held his eyes until he let go. That night, in the darkness of their bedroom, she lay beside him, listening to his slow, heavy breathing as he slept. Her heart was steady. She was past the point of turning back. The plan came together in fragments. Salisu would acquire a drug. Something quick, something that left little trace in the bloodstream. Administered in small doses first, to weaken the heart. Then the final dose, slipped into Ibrahim's nightcap on a night when no one would suspect a thing. Adrian arranged the meetings, always in different locations. A mechanic's shop on the edge of town, a shuttered nightclub whose owner owed him favors. Each time, Amina arrived with her veil pulled low, sunglasses hiding half her face, the picture of calm as she handed over envelopes of cash. "Poison is a patient weapon," Salisu told her once, tapping ash into a cracked saucer. "It kills slowly, so nobody notices until it's too late." Amina thought about the way Ibrahim laughed at those galas, the way he ordered staff around like chess pieces, the way he called her my jewel in public and my property in private. Patience, she decided, was a virtue she could afford. The first dose went into his whiskey 10 days later. Amina poured it herself, her hands steady as stone. Ibrahim drank half the glass before heading to bed, grumbling about the governor who had dared question him at dinner. 2 nights later, he complained of chest pains. The family doctor prescribed rest. Amina smiled faintly as she closed the bedroom curtains. But something unexpected happened the next week. Ibrahim's eldest son, Farouk, flew in from Dubai. Tall, sharp-eyed, barely 30. He hugged Amina politely, but she saw the suspicion in his gaze almost immediately. Farouk had always believed his father's enemies were everywhere. And he didn't trust easily. One evening, Farouk cornered her in the library. "My father's health," he said carefully. "It seems worse lately." Amina tilted her head, all innocence. "He's been under stress." Farouk studied her for a long moment. "Stress doesn't kill a man like my father." She met his gaze without blinking. "Maybe it does." Farouk didn't smile. She knew then that he would become a problem. By the time Ibrahim collapsed in his study a week later, clutching his chest, gasping for air, the doctor was already on call. He survived the night, but barely. And the whispers began immediately. Whispers about enemies. About betrayal. About the young bride who never cried. The house felt different after Ibrahim's collapse. Quieter. Servants moved carefully, like the walls themselves were listening. Security doubled at the gates. Farouk prowled the hallways at odd hours, eyes sharp, phone always buzzing with calls to doctors, lawyers, political allies. And Ibrahim, once a man whose voice could shake boardrooms, now spent his days in the master suite, propped against pillows, skin pale against the white sheets. The doctors called it a minor heart attack. A warning. But Amina knew better. It was the poison, patient and silent, already threading through his veins. The night after his collapse, Farouk called a family meeting in the main living room. The chandelier spilled warm light over a half-circle of relatives. Ibrahim's younger brother from Kaduna, 2 cousins from Lagos, an uncle flown in from London. Everyone looked tense, shadows under their eyes. Amina sat near the back, face calm behind her veil. "We need to tighten security," Farouk said, voice clipped. "Until we know who's behind this, no one comes or goes without clearance." One uncle cleared his throat. "Behind what exactly?" "The doctors said it was natural." Farouk's eyes flicked briefly to Amina before settling on the uncle. "And you believe that?" A murmur swept the room. Ibrahim's younger brother shifted uncomfortably. "Farouk, what are you implying? That someone in this house wants him dead?" Farouk didn't answer. He didn't need to. Everyone could feel it, the weight of suspicion thickening like the rain clouds gathering outside. Later that night, Amina stood alone on the balcony outside her suite, the city lights glittering below like a bowl of scattered diamonds. Adrian slipped out of the shadows. "He's getting weaker," he said quietly. She nodded. "Farouk suspects you." Amina didn't look at him. "Farouk suspects everyone." Adrian leaned against the railing. "He's not stupid. He's his father's son." "I know." "You're running out of time," Adrian said. "If Ibrahim dies now, Farouk will come for you first." Amina finally turned to face him. "Then we make sure he dies in a way no one can question." Adrian studied her for a long moment. Rain beaded on his jacket. "You're colder than I remember." "Colder keeps me alive," she said simply. 2 days later, Salisu called with news. He had the final dose. Stronger. Faster. Something that would finish what they started. "Slip it into his tea at night," Salisu said over the burner phone. "By morning, the doctor will call it cardiac arrest." Amina said nothing. She just stared at the small vial in her hand long after the call ended. But Farouk wasn't idle. That evening, she caught him in his father's study, rifling through documents, whispering urgently into his phone. When he noticed her watching, he straightened slowly, eyes unreadable. "My father trusts too easily," he said. "Does he?" Amina asked softly. Farouk's gaze sharpened. "He trusted you." Amina smiled faintly. "Maybe that's his mistake." For a moment, neither spoke. Rain drummed against the windows like distant gunfire. Finally, Farouk said, "When men like my father fall, they don't fall alone." He left without another word. That night, Ibrahim called Amina to his room. He was weaker now, voice rough, eyes ringed with shadows. But the arrogance hadn't left. "They're circling like vultures," he muttered. "My brothers. My son. Even the politicians." Amina poured him tea, steady hands hiding the small vial she had palmed moments earlier. "They smell power," Ibrahim said bitterly. "They think I'm finished." She handed him the cup. "You're not finished," she said softly. He drank half the tea in one swallow. Set the cup down. Didn't notice the faint smile curving her mouth in the dim light. But just as the poison began its work, Farouk burst into the room. "Father," he said urgently. "The minister from Kaduna is here. Says it's life or death." Ibrahim cursed, shoved the tea aside, and pushed himself to his feet. For a moment, Amina thought he might collapse right there. But he didn't. He followed Farouk out, leaving the half-empty cup cooling on the table. The poison unfinished. Amina stood frozen in the silence after they left, pulse hammering. Timing was slipping through her fingers like water. And she could feel the walls closing in. The next day, the newspapers exploded with rumors. Billionaire kingmaker gravely ill. Family tensions rise as succession questions emerge. Reporters swarmed the gates. Politicians began circling like sharks. And Farouk watched Amina more closely than ever. That night, Adrian called. "You need to end this before Farouk moves first," he said. Amina stared out the rain-streaked window toward the city lights. "He wants me to fall with his father," she murmured. "Then don't give him the chance," Adrian said. The final dose sat in her drawer, waiting. And Amina knew the next move would decide everything. The rain had stopped over Abuja, leaving the streets shimmering like spilled oil under streetlights. The city seemed to hold its breath as Amina stepped into the master suite, the final vial in her hand. Ibrahim Jadado was there, sprawled across the bed, A man who had ruled empires now trembling under the weight of his own arrogance. His breaths came short, rattling, chest pressed with the poison she had administered days ago. The doctors called it a heart attack, but Amina knew better. He glared at her with a mixture of fear and disbelief. "You think you can?" he started, voice weak, but she didn't let him finish. Amina's smile was cold, perfected over months of planning. "I don't think, Ibrahim. I know." The city outside hummed faintly, but inside the room, only the tick of the antique clock broke the silence. Ibrahim tried to lunge, to grab the edge of her arm, but his strength had drained with each carefully measured dose. His empire couldn't save him now. Not from her. "Your power," she said, stepping closer, "was always borrowed. Mine is mine." And with that, she left him on the bed, eyes wide, chest tight, and walked to the window. Farouk arrived hours later, summoned by panic over his father's sudden collapse. He expected chaos, a weakened empire ripe for him to take. Instead, he found calm, impenetrable, controlled. Amina met him in the library. Rain still glittered on the windows like a curtain of diamonds. "Where's your father?" Farouk demanded. "In his sleep," she said softly, tilting her head. "Forever." His face drained of color. "What did you do?" She stepped closer, letting the faintest hint of a smile curl her lips. "What any woman in my position would do. I survived. I won. I own what I was promised." Farouk faltered, realizing for the first time that his father's empire wasn't his by default. Amina had seized it all: wealth, power, influence. And no one, not even him, could take it back. By morning, the mansion was quiet. Doctors pronounced Ibrahim dead. Farouk tried to rally family members, but their whispers fell on deaf ears. He had no proof, no leverage. Every ally in Abuja had already begun to feel Amina's quiet dominion. She moved through the halls like a shadow, untouched by grief, every step deliberate. Luxury was her armor, charm her weapon, patience her ally. Adrian watched from the balcony. "You really did it," he said. She turned, eyes glinting with ice and gold. "I told you. Kings fall. Queens rise." The newspapers exploded by noon. Billionaire kingmaker dies suddenly. Heiress assumes control of empire. Succession plans in question as young bride emerges powerful. Politicians scrambled. Rivals calculated. And Farouk? He retreated to Dubai, too cautious, too young, too slow to challenge a woman who had already won. Amina didn't care. She had no need to. She was free. Untouchable. Beautiful. Dangerous. That evening, she walked through the mansion alone, golden light spilling through floor-to-ceiling windows, marble cool beneath her heels. Everything was hers: the empire, the legacy, the city's whispered fear of her name. Adrian stepped beside her quietly. "And now," she said, voice low and certain, "I live." She paused, letting the truth sink in. "And they all know it." The camera could have captured her face perfectly framed against the city skyline, the glint of diamonds, the flicker of candlelight reflecting her gold-threaded gown. She was every headline, every whisper, every fear, hers. And behind the calm, behind the beauty, lingered the danger. A queen who had killed, conquered, and would never be caught. The empire breathed beneath her fingers. The city bowed quietly. And Amina Jamil, the heiress, the widow, the queen, smiled. Because in a world of kings and sons, she had become the storm. Thank you for watching. Please do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on your notification for more intriguing stories. See you soon. Bye.